It's March 27th, 1996. Japan is about to witness the last episode of the anime television series Neon Genesis Evangelion, with an ending that would make many people question its existence in the first place, not only in regards to episode 26, but also episode 25 that was released a week prior. These episodes were talked about so much regarding its approach, its ambiguity, and especially its lack of animation during certain parts, to the point where a number of fans felt frustrated by the fact that many questions were left unanswered. Some apparently even sent death threats to the creator of the show, Hideaki Anno, and graffitied Gainax's studio walls. It's been claimed that the controversy was massive during its original release, but there have also been reports where the controversy was nowhere near as big as it seemed to be, that many fans also sent letters showing their appreciation of these last two episodes. What is known is that a year later, Anno and the studio Gainax would release a film titled The End of Evangelion, which would retell the events of episodes 25 and 26 in a different manner. The reason why is still unsure, but my guess is Anno was definitely dissatisfied with something, either with the fans or with himself, or most likely, both. Whatever the truth actually is, there is no denying that the last two episodes did feel frustrating to a lot of fans, and The End of Evangelion is deemed by many as the definitive ending. But I'm not here to talk about the film, I'm here to talk about the original End of Evangelion, and why I think it's a masterpiece. I'm not going to talk about every aspect of the show and all of its underlying themes, but rather the aspect that caught my interest and how I believe to have culminated perfectly in the ending of the show. What my personal view, experience, and my own analysis of this show and its ending are. But first, we need to talk about plot as a whole. Generally, plot normally consists of a sequence of events that advances the story forward through cause and effect. Plot is considered to be crucial for a telling of a story to work and make the audience engaged. In other words, a narrative is constructed that forces our characters into a structure of events and then we accompany them towards a resolution of some kind. So, knowing this, what is Evangelion's plot and how does it eventually lead to its last episode? The plot consists of a teenage boy called Shinji who was recruited by his father to work for the organization Nerve and pilot a giant mecha called Evangelion, more specifically Eva 1. This is done to fight against an alien species called the Angels, known to have caused a global cataclysm which happened 15 years prior called the Second Impact. In other words, a third impact is imminent and Shinji is told that he is the only one who can save the world. But by the end of the show, you don't really have that resolution. In the simplest terms, you have Shinji questioning himself constantly and all of the other characters continuously speak to Shinji for him to figure things out. Which means that the last two episodes don't really have any sort of plot resolution. But as I mentioned before, I believe this to be a masterpiece. Why? Well, let's talk about character arc. Witnessing a character through means of a story and its plot normally equals to his or her growth. The plot constructs the sequence of events so that the character can go from point A to point B. Plots and character arcs normally work together as one, and many people, especially in regards to American cinema, tells us this should always be the case. But the reality is that all of this comes down to the perception of the audience and what each want from a movie. And what I connect with the most when watching any sort of medium is character, especially in how that character is portrayed through the use of imagery and enhanced by the use of sound and music. How all of these come into one to express something that holds dear to the person who created it, where we truly understand his or her psyche through the portrayal of its main character. And this is shown in the last two episodes of Evangelion, a form of expression that I believe to be rooted in Japanese filmmaking and its culture, which differs from the approach that usually happens in American cinema. American cinema has the intent of having the story be the foundation of everything. In other words, you need to have a solid script, solid plot, solid character arc in order to have what is considered to be a solid film. American films, when they do this well, it is utterly incredible. Movies like Once Upon a Time in the West and The Hustler are great examples of this, because American cinema normally has characters with well-established identities. They either know who they are or what they want to be, and many times falls in the category of who is the good guy and who is the bad guy. This isn't always the case, because you have films like Taxi Driver and Apocalypse Now who raise that question, especially considering the time it was made. But normally, American cinema makes it quite distinct who is on each side. Japanese cinema doesn't quite portray this. The search for one's identity is approached from a very different angle. Initially, both sides of the spectrum seem to be quite clear, but as the story goes along, characters start to show more of who they are underneath. How their perceived identities can be misleading, like it happens with the Seven Samurai. What is good and bad, black and white, starts to become grey. This can be found in so many Japanese movies, with the most well-known being Akira Kurosawa's films. So if this is prevalent in Japanese cinema, this is also going to translate into similar forms of medium, which can easily be found in the world of anime. Anime is all about taking these ideas and developing them as much as possible. That almost every character, whether good or bad, eventually develops them in a way that makes them human. And almost all anime is like this. Even shonen anime, you still have both protagonists and antagonists who really struggle to find their identity. That saving the world isn't the main goal, but an excuse to show the flaws in human nature of these characters and the tormenting path they go through. That we can be like them. How these works of art have an impact that lasts longer than just the duration of a movie or an episode. How the struggle with finding their identity also comes with the struggle of their own failure. This I believe to be in part caused by the aftermath of the Second World War. How so many people suffered and lost their lives. How the ideals and strength their country used to uphold so proudly were ultimately shaken to its core. How that must have impacted them so much for so many years, prevalent even to this day. And this can be found in so many anime, which many times deals with an enormous explosion caused by mankind or nature itself, and how it affects everyone in such a negative way, and how that can be a representation of the character's failure, making them question their beliefs on who they are in the first place, which leads us back to Neon Genesis Evangelion. Having the story take place 15 years following the aftermath of the second impact, which almost destroyed the human race. Currently trying to prevent a third one due to the enormous consequences of the previous impact. And our main character Shinji is forced by everyone to be the savior. But he is a character who struggles immensely with the notion of failure. A character who doesn't have a clear distinction of what is right and wrong. A character who is suffering a great deal and has no grasp of who he is. And that is what Neon Genesis Evangelion for me is all about. It's about how the creator of the show, Hideaki Anno, is able to convey all of this into one story, but most of all into one character. It's not just about Shinji, it's about Anno expressing himself through Shinji. It's known that Anno suffered through immense depression throughout the making of this series. To say he wasn't in a good place is an understatement. And even though it's been said that he didn't have a clear path of where the story was headed, especially in regards to the limitations and troubled scheduling towards the end of the show, what is clear, he never lost sight of what was important to him to tell in this story. And that was Shinji and his progression as a character, which seems to be Anno trying to find some sort of catharsis through Shinji and his development. In very simple terms, Shinji is someone who doesn't want to deal with the society he lives in. Early on in the story, he tries running away from it, but that also makes him feel like he let down the people who expect more of him. And Shinji is constantly going through this loop of uncertainty. He tries to do things to make other people like him more, but he also doesn't want to have the responsibility of doing those things. He feels like he never has a choice and he is always forced to do what other people expect him to do. But then, when he doesn't do any of it, he feels alone and feels like he failed. He has difficulty in dealing with the lack of connection he has with his father, Gendo, and how his hardship has affected him. He has difficulty in finding someone who has cared for him the same way his mother had when he was a young boy, and finds that comfort in other female characters, especially Rei. But also how his personality contrasts heavily with Asuka, but in reality she is just as fragile as he is. And thus at times they share a mutual connection which can be attributed to love. How Misato, even though she is the person who is taking care of him, is only really able to communicate honestly through a sexual connection. And how Kaoru is the only man that Shinji had a strong trust and emotional connection with, regardless of how brief or manipulative it was. All of these characters are here to show Shinji's enormous insecurities as a man, the lack of a mother figure, the lack of a romantic connection, the lack of a sexual connection, the lack of an emotional connection. These aren't always mutually exclusive to these characters, but all of this is to develop Shinji's character even more. Because Shinji wants any sort of connection, but is also extremely afraid of it and sees it as a negative thing, and why most of them, especially the female characters, always show up during his mental breakdown scenes, shown in episode 16, and then in episode 20, reaching the existential nature in its conclusion in episodes 25 and 26. Shinji's ultimate goal as a character is reached in these final episodes, where we leave the physical world and dive into the human instrumentality project, where everything and everyone become one. Deconstructing Rei Ayanami, Asuka Langley, Misato Katsuragi, but especially Shinji Ikari, with him figuring out each instance of his life, the world he lives in, who he perceives himself to be, what everyone perceives himself to be, who he really is. Because for me, Evangelion was never about a boy getting inside a robot and defeating angels. It wasn't about saving the world. It was about Shinji overcoming his notion of failure and finding his own identity. And the culmination of this comes with the freedom scene. This is for me one of those moments that will forever stick with me, because it suddenly uses the art of animation as an actual form of expression, leading Shinji into a world of nothingness, a world of freedom. The freedom of not having to worry about anything or anyone, of no society, of not having to do anything at all, of being utterly alone, which in turn creates a feeling of insignificance to Shinji. And thus, he creates an area, an existing dimension where he is able to stand on. This makes him feel grounded to a sense of reality, but removes an aspect of freedom he once had. And through this existential moment of his, with Misato, Rei, Asuka, Kaoru, his father, and even his mother, explaining the perception of reality, he comes to the following conclusion: that for him to have a perception of himself, he needs a world and people around him to perceive him as a form of existence. And through that perception and his own, the similarities and differences he finds in the many forms of himself that exist through him and everyone else, he becomes who he is. Shinji. This is all shown with very little use of animation, with a wide screen almost like a literal clean slate and a very simple drawing of Shinji, and creating that first sense of reality, the ground, is simply the drawing of a line, to which he slowly starts to take the form of other shapes to explain more the perception that he has of himself. Once he realizes this conclusion, the simple drawing of him becomes more defined and we see a close-up of his face speaking about this realization, the realization of who he is. This is just filmmaking at its finest. Regardless if Anno didn't have a clear path of where the story was headed, regardless that plot elements of the show had been removed due to its similarities in regards to horrible events that transpired in Japan a year prior, Anno and the animators were still able to create something really special. How it engrossed me in making me ultimately relate with Shinji, how it made me understand better what a person like Anno might have gone through in his life, how it made me question myself and my existence through this conversation between these characters. I never saw Shinji as a wimp or a crybaby. I saw a boy who had difficulty in realizing his own existence, how hard it was for him to deal with it throughout his life, how he faced failure and overcame it in the end. by realizing that he has the power to look at things, at people, at the world, but especially himself in a different light. As explained to him, even something positive can be experienced on rainy days. And how everyone, in one of the most ridiculous but also satisfying conclusions, congratulates him in the last scene, ending the show on a smile. At the end of the day, when we talk about plot, in my eyes, it should never be seen as the end goal of making a film or a show, but rather as a means, almost as an excuse to dive deeper into themes that open our eyes to subject matters that are important for us to think about. That cinema isn't just about telling a story, it's about expressing emotions, it's about expressing one's fears, their flaws and their minds, and realize better what our emotions are, what our fears are, our flaws, and especially how this shapes our deepest thoughts and insecurities. Cinema has the benefit of having endless possibilities to showcase anything, through its visuals, through its sound, its music and acting, and how this can come all together with the use of editing, which Neon Genesis Evangelion excels at constantly, showing at times really long shots that culminate on extremely difficult choices that our characters have to make, but also contrasting beautifully with sudden fast-paced cuts to make us understand better the psyche of these characters. The show uses so many tools in so many different ways to express something that can be really powerful, which encapsulates perfectly the last 2 episodes of this show. And in a twisted turn of events, realizing who Shinji is helps us identify ourselves even more. The humanity shown in Shinji, as terrifying and depressing it may be, gives us insight to what people can go through mentally, including even ourselves, all expressed in a way I had never seen before. And this is why I believe the original ending to be a masterpiece. I can't deny that watching this show 20 years later didn't benefit me. It did, because I had the opportunity to watch the director's cut versions of episodes 21 to 24, which not only deepen the events in episodes 25 and 26, but also tie in perfectly with the film The End of Evangelion. How the film parallels perfectly with the existential nature found in episodes 25 and 26, and how we see the events of the third impact unfold throughout, and how our characters, Asuka, Rei, and Shinji, are involved in this. How the plot and character arcs do eventually intertwine and come to an end, presenting us with the ambiguous scene between Shinji and Asuka, where we see Shinji reacting aggressively towards Asuka, which results in her caressing his face. How Shinji then breaks down emotionally until the moment ends with Asuka's line, "How disgusting." How there are a million ways to try and explain what happens in this moment, especially if we consider the scenes between them throughout the film. But I do believe it to be more positive, especially when we realize the original ending of episode 26, because in the midst of such a terrifying moment, there was a sign of hopefulness. How Asuka acknowledges Shinji's existence and what he needed at that time, which episode 26 teaches us, that even on rainy days, we can experience something good from it. How both the original episodes and the film are complementary to each other and are needed to fully comprehend everything that happens, even if it takes multiple viewings to form our own opinions and analysis on what they mean to each of us, both psychologically and emotionally. I didn't have to wait a year to witness all of this, or even weeks. I watched all of it in 1 week and I was in awe of its brilliance. But nothing can ever take away the moment I witnessed the freedom scene in episode 26. That, for me, is the true nature of everything that makes Neon Genesis Evangelion one of the best shows I've ever seen. But most of all, one of the best character studies of all time.